Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about gardening, so specifically about starting seeds and do I heat the greenhouse. And I'm going to explain why I do not use added heat or light in regards to starting seeds, or why I don't heat the greenhouse in the winter time. So first of all, let's talk about seed starting. Now years ago I did try using those LED grow lights, and those did nothing for my plants. In fact, I mean nothing at all. And at that point I was thinking, anyway, do I really want to use grow lights? Do I have to use grow lights? And I mean, the whole idea of starting seeds indoors is to get them a jump start. I get that. But what happens if there's a grid down situation and we don't have the power to keep a heat pad going or some extra lighting for the plants themselves? So I had decided I'm going to do what I can to try to avoid using anything that requires me to depend on electricity for starting my garden plants. So of course, since I do start my tomatoes and peppers around here, you do have to start them in late winter if you want to get any production at all. Yes, we do get tomatoes that will come up and peppers that will come up on their own in the greenhouse from ones that had fallen the previous year, but those never get mature enough to produce, even in the greenhouse. Well, the peppers do okay, but not the tomatoes. So obviously, to get that head start, I do still need to start them inside, but I don't rely on electricity at all. So I start them in the living room. We actually have a bench right in front of our south facing window. So I haven't started them yet, obviously, but here's some images from previous years. So I use my 2 to 4 inch pots in that window on that bench because that's a south facing window. It's going to get the most light, and the living room is also the warmest room in the whole house because that's where our wood stove is. Now my tomato starts do get a little bit leggy even with that light coming directly in from the window, but it's really not that bad. And when I transplant them, I don't mind that because now what I have is more stock that I can bury into the ground to make the plant more sturdy when I transplant it. So I only transplant my tomato starts, for instance, twice. So I'll put them in a bigger pot in the greenhouse in the window, and then later I will put them in the ground, and that's when I actually separate them out. So if you're interested in how I do all that and how I separate the tomato starts, I'll go ahead and link you back to a video, because I know a lot of people, when the seedlings are real little, they put them in a bunch of little separate plants. Well, that's a lot of work that to me is really not actually necessary. I find just putting the whole cluster into a bigger pot until I'm ready to put them in the ground works just fine. And disturbing the roots on tomato plants, by the way, they don't mind. They really don't mind. In fact, I think it helps to encourage their growth. And then with the tomatoes, the peppers I find just always do best in pots, so they stay in pots. The tomatoes I do plant directly into the ground once they get to a certain size, and I'm ready to close the chickens off from that area entirely. So now that brings me to the question about the greenhouse, because a lot of people will ask me, well, do you heat your greenhouse? Do you grow anything in the greenhouse in the winter? Well, before we got chickens, I did grow lettuce, but even in the greenhouse, even though it was lettuce, it would start out okay, but then it would just stop and it wouldn't grow anymore. It wouldn't die, it would just stop until early spring when it started getting warm enough for it to take off again. But it would just sit at a standstill. And so I realized, though the nice thing about that was it gave those lettuces a head start, so that I had the new lettuces I planted while I was waiting for those to come in, the ones that started to grow and stayed dormant, those ones really started putting out a lot of lettuce for us. But here's a couple of the main reasons why I do not do any winter gardening, even in the greenhouse in winter, and that is because the greenhouse is one of those areas that allows our chickens to have a dry place to not only take their dust baths, but just to hang out on our super wet days that we get in the wintertime. Winter's the worst. I don't really like the chickens to have to hang out in their coop all day long, and especially in the wintertime, it's kind of dark in there. Whereas if they can go to the greenhouse, they have a place that stays a little bit warmer, but also stays pretty dry on the wettest days. And they have plenty of dirt to take their dust baths in. So obviously I can't grow anything in the ground in there during that time of the year, and I keep the door open all the time, night, day. It just stays open so chickens can come and go as they please. And it just doesn't stay warm enough in there for me to even try to grow things in pots because of that, and also because of the location of our greenhouse. But the other thing is, I like to allow that soil time, as would happen in nature, to just rest during the winter. And we'll throw leaves in there, like we just got some leaves from the neighbor, and we just spread a whole bunch of them in the greenhouse and let those break down in there. The chickens will dig through them and they'll mix all that up. They keep that ground all tilled up, and I'll throw their scratch in there on wet days so that they'll keep mixing all that stuff in there. And of course they're pooping in there, so they're leaving some fertilizer in there that will have time to break down enough for me for it to not be too hot for the tomatoes, because it's not like I'm putting a big pile on where I'm putting the tomatoes. And it's been working really good for my plants to do it this way, and for the chickens. So not only does that soil get a chance to rest a little bit, at least from growing, that it gets more added to it, and it's always getting stirred up because of the chickens, and then it benefits the chickens as well. So it's just kind of a win-win that way. But here's the other thing about growing in the winter time here, is that it's so dark all the time. Now I know some people do it with a greenhouse, but they have to keep it heated. Especially where our greenhouse is, it does not get much light at all in the winter. And even if it was in the middle of the yard and caught the most sun during the day, well, some days we don't get any sun at all. Some days it's dark and gloomy all day long, and it can be like that for a month straight. So these things need a little more light than what they're going to get out there, and then not any heat, and again, not wanting to be dependent on the heat to grow anything. And I do believe it's good to let your soil rest through the winter and let things break down. But we have to do what we have to do according to our area and what's going to work best for us. So I'm just sharing with you why I do what I do. If we ever expand onto our other pieces of property, maybe as far as growing goes, you know, we do have a couple of different other greenhouses that are much bigger that we have yet to set up. That might be something we might be able to consider more, because we can set those things up in a better location that can catch more light, and I don't need those areas for the chickens because they have here in the winter time. I wouldn't be moving them back and forth to the other piece of property in the winter. They just stay here. So to sum all that up, the reason I don't use added heat and light when starting plants or growing plants is I don't want to have to depend on electricity if in case the solar power isn't going to be enough for us. And if we lose public power and we don't have a way to run all that stuff, then what am I going to do? Then the other thing I wanted to say about the plants, about another reason why I do not start them with added heat and light, even if I didn't mind being dependent on electricity or was never concerned about not having it, is that I believe that helps them actually acclimate better to our cooler temperatures and climate anyway. So if I was to give them, use the hot pad method and then all the light, but then I move them out in the greenhouse where there's no heat, and maybe we have a week straight of dark, gloomy days in the spring or even early summer, which, yes, that happens, sometimes several weeks. I feel that causes them to kind of go backwards a little bit, because now they have to readjust to not having so much light when inside they were always getting all this light. And what I found, by the way, is that when growing my tomatoes and other plants the way I do, that the ones I've been doing for several years, they've always done better for me just taking the more simple method and not relying on added heat and light anyway. They've just been a lot healthier. Now, if you do really want to keep a winter garden going and you have a greenhouse and you're looking at, trying to heat it, what I would consider, even if you're using electricity right now or considering using public power for the electricity, look at also having some backup methods, like that little stainless steel tent wood stove that I had mentioned in other videos. They come with a pipe. You still have to vent it to the outside, but that would be one way that wouldn't require public power that you could heat the greenhouse. And I could see doing that here if I ever decided to do that. But that would be one way you could do it that wouldn't require electricity. There's other methods you could look into. I would just recommend that because you just never know. If you're relying on your own crops, what you're growing to survive on, and you're relying on heat, you're going to need some other options. But my personal opinion is trying to do the best you can to grow things without all that added stuff, because a lot of plants will adapt. Just like when we plant seeds, we get seeds from somebody else. Maybe they came from a totally different part of the country or from a different country altogether, and they're adapted to that climate and it's very different from yours. If you can get anything to grow that you can get seeds from that, once you take those seeds and then start them again the next year, they're going to already be more acclimated to your area. And sometimes it can take a couple years of doing that to get some good sturdy plants that are perfect for your own growing climate. So that to me is what you need to be looking more into. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with winter crops. That's great if you can pull it off. But if you can grow plenty during the time of the year that you don't have to rely on more artificial means to grow the plants, then you grow all that stuff during the time of the year you can, just like the squash that I've got back here, and then preserve it. So right now I've been preserving, cooking up and then dehydrating the spaghetti squash and pumpkin from this past year. Takes up a lot less room in storage. They have a lot of uses just like that. And I can work through that through the year, so I don't have to grow those during the winter time. And same thing goes with any of your greens. You can dehydrate them up if you're wanting them for the sake of nutrition, whether it be dandelion greens, kale, collards, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is that you're growing, nettle, you can dehydrate those up, mix them into either a powder or you can flake them like I like to do, and then add them to different dishes to get the nutrients. I even use those for making my own homemade multivitamin mineral extract. That way we can get more of those nutrients in our diet during the winter time, so I don't have to depend on growing something in the winter. And that goes for anything else. It doesn't matter what it is. Beans, I grow a lot of beans. Beans grow well here, and peas. And then we eat on them all year round and always have extra, and usually are ahead by 1 to 2 years. So let's say we have a bad crop one year and we can't get enough, then that's why you need to put up as much as you can, because maybe next year you'll do everything the same and then you won't get as much harvest or any at all for whatever reason. Such as this past summer, we had in the early summer, real early summer, usually when it's still pretty cold here, we had a 3-day heat wave that if I hadn't had my snow peas planted where they were, it would have killed them entirely, because snow peas like cooler weather. But it did stunt them, so I didn't get near as many snow peas this last year as I normally would. I still got plenty, and that was great, but just not as many as I normally would. So you never know what kind of weird thing's going to come out of the blue that could cause you to lose a whole crop. Maybe the elk get into your garden and eat everything. Everything was growing beautifully, but somehow the elk or the rabbits or the deer or whatever pest it is just demolished everything. It can happen. So always be at least a year or two ahead. Grow a lot and then put it all up. It's okay to share, give away and all that, but don't waste any of it, because you just never know. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and it gave you some thought as we're getting ready to start our seeds for 2022 and what we want to grow and kind of laying things out and planting. And if you have any more questions and related starting seeds, if I already have a video, I'll go ahead and link you back to that, or I'll shoot another video and maybe an FAQ garden related video, so that we can really work on getting our gardens going. So don't forget your medicinal herbs as well, not just fruits and vegetables. We need those medicinal herbs. So besides questions, if you have any other thoughts or tips you would like to share, go ahead and put those in the comments down below. And thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.